The gusty winds blow.
They do, yes.
Welcome.
On this silent night.
Wow. The month is January and the year is 2023, but it's a day somewhere. You know what? Holidays today. Today, it is National Girl Hug Boy Day, Hot Toddy Day, and Milk Day. National Human Trafficking Awareness, Arkansas Day, Joel Day. If your name is Joel,
well, I mean,
today's your day.
I'm planning to release this episode on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, which
Yay!
is definitely one of the holidays we had in mind when we said that this was going to be a holiday special.
Which is why we chose a movie very, very close to that in remembrance. A Hallmark movie.
A Hallmark movie, yes.
Exactly in line. We're going to talk about Silent Night, released in 2002. Yay! Made for TV. And it is set during the Battle of the Bulge in World War II and is very loosely based on true events. And it's about a Christmas Eve. One Christmas Eve in 1944 when some German mother, Linda Terminator Hamilton, is who already lost her son in the war, has a younger son, Fritz, and they're all doing accents, and they're all German. And they're in the middle of a hunting cabin in the Ardennes forest during the war. And then basically American soldiers come, and then German ones come, and then there's a lot of putting differences aside for the sake of Christmas spirit. And that is the message that Hallmark has left us. We also have Matthew Harbour as Fritz and Romano Orzari as Rossi and a bunch of other names nobody really knows. Martin Newfield is in something else, and I couldn't remember what he was in. But James McGowan, just some other actors, you know.
Lots of working actor faces in this. Actors that you'll go, oh, I know him from somewhere, but you probably wouldn't know their name.
Yeah, except Linda Hamilton.
Linda
That's
Hamilton,
the only one. That's pretty much all I have to say. What did you guys think of the movie?
Well, I'm going to jump in first here to take a little bit of a sideline, because I know from our analytics that a majority of viewers don't make it to the end of our episodes. So I'm jumping in at the beginning here to say that I am making a film with a pretty substantial budget,
Yay.
And I need your help in order to fund it. We're running a Seed and Spark that should be up by the time this episode drops. I'll put the link in the description, but you can also find it at www.seedandspark.com/fund the search for Alexander. It'll be my senior capstone film at film school, and we're hoping to raise around $9,000 to $10,000. Even if you can't donate, if you pass along the campaign, every little helps. And now I'm going to talk about Silent Night. Thank you for that side distraction.
You're welcome for the plug, Zach. I let Zach do that.
Cinema.
He did, yes. In terms of Silent Night, though, I am somebody who I lean into the Hallmark movies as a punchline thing every year. My mother really likes them. And has them playing on in the background every year around the holidays. And every year I come downstairs and I'm able to basically outline the plot by seeing a single scene, and I can tell her exactly where it's going to go. But this Silent Night is from a very different generation of Hallmark, where they seem to have been trying to do quite different things with their kind of minuscule budgets. At some point, they seem to have sort of figured out exactly what they need to do to get the viewers that they want invested in coming back, which is why you get the same thing in every Hallmark movie now. But this is pretty different for the channel, at least from what I'm used to. It's very much still a TV movie, but it's got some quality actors in it. It's shot pretty well. A lot of it's kind of gray and high contrast, but it looks all right, and the acting is all right. You very much get the feel of the time and place, even if it is obviously very limited in scope, and Cabin in the Woods doesn't necessarily date. It's not like you would look at that Cabin in the Woods now and go like, wow, I feel like I'm in the 40s. But it's a very functional holiday film that's doing something a little different from what you'd see from this kind of production company usually. I gave it a 2 out of 5. I didn't love it. There are definitely limitations here in terms of the television production, but I think for what it is, it's better than you usually see from this kind of thing. That's coming from a guy who would give most Hallmark movies like a charitable 1. Yeah, if you're into Hallmark movies, if you're into Christmas films, if you're into war films, or if you're into all three, this could definitely be up your alley, and you might enjoy it more than I did.
Yeah, I think I'm mostly aligned with Zach's reasoning here. I landed on a 2.5 for much of the same reasons. Though I will say I think Linda Hamilton is quite good, and a lot of reviews I glanced at mention her, the inconsistency of her accent and whatnot, and that didn't really bug me too much. And I think the highest praise I can give this work at large is I really like the way it handles language, because a lot of times whenever we're dealing in a story set anywhere in Europe, it could be in Germany or France, we'll have characters speaking English in the corresponding accent, or speaking English in a British accent, because that's slightly more foreign than a standard American accent, I guess. And in no way addressing characters who may have a different first or natural speaking language. Here, there is a plot reason for Germans to speak English, and for there are moments where they speak German and it makes sense and whatever. So just a tiny, more nitpicky thing, but something that a lot of movies just sort of skate over and accept because it's been done like that habitually. But I appreciated that Silent Night did not do that. In terms of its what it's doing within its confines, I don't have any broader complaints with it, other than like Zach, I'm not really drawn to the Hallmark style very much, and there were a couple scenes where I just get taken out of it. I don't like the guy who plays I guess the American sergeant, whoever the highest ranking American is. I just found him vaguely annoying. That's Kirk Douglas face syndrome, perhaps. But and then the one American guy who was wounded, I can't remember if it's the scene where they're cauterizing the wound or if they're doing something else. They revisit his ailment a few times, but there's just one scene where he's just like yelling in pain. He's just like, ah, 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 for like a really long sustained period of time. And I kind of got to the Mitchell and Marriage Story mode.
Oh, really? I quite liked that, if I'm honest. Because I sort of felt like, wow, this is so non-Hallmark to have this bleeding, in pain man strapped down to a bed. I was a little shocked because I thought he would be like injured, but it would be like he had a black eye. It went like, oh, every now and then. But I mean, to their credit, they do go to try to make it look pretty painful for him.
They do, and I enjoyed it, though maybe not for the reasons they were aiming for with those directorial decisions. But I do think there's a lot of heart here. I do think, despite mine and Zach's cynicism, I think maybe a more casual viewer of films, and somebody that likes Hallmark or just likes a family feel good Christmas movie will probably enjoy this. And I like the kid. Linda Hamilton's kid is kind of is disturbingly a bit brainwashed already by the sort of Hitler Youth stuff. But and I recommend you glance at his Letterboxd profile to look at his picture there, because it's really funny. But no, he was good. And then the third and final American, not the sergeant or the injured guy, but the third guy, he is like the quintessential face I recognize, but I have no idea what I recognize it from. I quite liked him, and I think his sort of broad optimism suits the film well. So good note of casting there. 2.5 mostly because it wasn't for me, and It's still pretty much locked into the confines of what it is. But I do think there are plenty of people out there that would like it.
Okay. Okay. All right. That's fine. You better
Sorry.
not be sorry.
Jeez.
Never mind. I'm not sorry.
I'm not a really huge fan of Hallmark. I'll be honest. I don't like Hallmark very much, and I can appreciate them, but I make fun of them more than I enjoy them cumulatively. Like I think 70% of the time I make fun of them, and I've seen way too many now. But I think I was trying my best not to think of this film relatively when like rating it and thinking about the good things about it, and I guess it kind of just amalgamates into one large thing of relativity, I guess, in my head, where I'm just like very slightly considering everything. And like when you're slightly considering the budget and who's producing it and the acting experience and the directing experience leading up to it, then I guess like adding all of that up circumstantially, this would be considered pretty damn good for what it is. But I did find a lot of like thematic value in this, and I think there's a lot of things that it approaches as a war movie and as a Christmas movie that you wouldn't really not only expect like a Hallmark production or a TV film, but honestly just like any Christmas movie in general. And I feel like you could really come, like if you talk to multiple people, you'd have different takeaways about it. Like you can learn a lot about war and like the implications of being in that scenario and like the ideological differences, and it may be like very it's very abstract, I guess, and it's not like considering any broader like or it's not considering any like major philosophical instance or anything. But I think that is more beneficial in this case because it feels it adds more like it makes it more natural, and I feel like I'm not going to say that conversations were like supernatural or that the acting was good enough where it totally felt like an entirely believable scenario, even though I do believe that this actually like happened to some extent, but it's pretty obvious that there's a lot of drama that was added, but not to the point where it would like bother me or be so out of the realm of possibility that I would just like write it off. But I think I don't know. I think the varied themes in this and just like understanding how complicated like personal conflicts can get and how varied the personalities were of soldiers in general, and how like having that larger conflict in the background can be impactful to something as simple as just like putting ornaments on a Christmas tree kind of thing. And I think it kind of puts a lot of things into question that most films in general about Christmas don't. And I think that is like I think that's way understated, and I feel like that has a lot of value to it. All things considered, I totally understand that it's not really like super intentional or calculated, and a lot of times it feels like what's like the best scenario that we can think of next kind of directing, and like how can we wing this without making it look like it was winged, I guess. And with the cheapest possible like everything. But I think it's just perfectly in the bounds where I have to be like, okay, like a lot of these scenarios did happen and it's just all happening at once, and then that's like a believable scenario. And I feel like believability is something that has to be mentioned, especially coming off the heels of Home Alone 2. And I think that even though it's obvious that this is like a high, like basically impossible scenario, I do think that, I mean, situations like this did actually happen to some extent, and I think there's just enough of a line of like truth to this that it makes it slightly more impactful. All the things that you guys considered, obviously, and I just think the thematic value and the different like entirely different topics of conversation that can arise from simple good guy, bad guy come together on Christmas, I feel like it got a lot more complicated than that, and I feel like that is that defying of expectations is worth noting. So I gave it 4 out of 5. I think it's really great, and I do think that the production is really obviously not like to par in a lot of cases, and I also think that it can be really cheesy and cheap, and I just think considering that and then looking at the broader topics that are talked about in it and the different messages that you can get from it is really something else. So I guess we can talk about Linda Hamilton's performance just because we've seen her before, and how do you think that her acting compares to like the rest of the supporting cast, and do you feel like that it was really necessary to have her be like the main character?
I'm gonna be honest. I thought she was consistently kind of outacted by Matthew Harbour, who plays Fritz.
Wow.
And maybe that's just because I have maybe a cynicism towards seeing her performance in this. Because Linda Hamilton has always felt to me like an actress who's wanted to escape the Terminator. And she's done quite a few dramatic roles, maybe in sort of an effort to move away from that, but all I can kind of see is her in that, and so it always sort of feels, her performances in these dramatic roles always feel kind of desperate to me. Whereas Matthew Harbour has a lot less to prove as a child actor. But I was consistently pretty impressed with his German dialect, which I thought his was a little bit better than Linda Hamilton's. And I think also just the fact that Linda Hamilton's character is sort of this pillar of virtue at the center of the story, at least to me, makes her kind of uninteresting. Because I kind of find like the Nazi captain a more interesting character, because I think there's more layers there and there's more conflict in terms of what is he going to do in this environment? Is he going to follow his orders? Is he going to do what's requested by Linda Hamilton? There's more decisions that character is making, and therefore there's more introspection that you can do as a viewer than you can into a character like Linda Hamilton's, who, regardless of what's thrown at her, you pretty much consistently know where she's at and what she wants throughout the entirety of the film.
I see where you're coming from, and I guess from like a plot development standpoint, she's pretty static. We know her feelings on the war and Hitler and the holiday pretty early on, and they don't change. But at the same time, I think the film falls apart pretty quickly if the no guns thing doesn't work, and I think it totally works. Like, despite myself, and my biggest concern approaching this was not even the Hallmark aesthetics or melodrama, but more so and despite the fact that this is vaguely based on real events and that a version of this did happen, just the idea of men who are trying to kill each other, like giving each other a day. For whatever reason, that's just hard for me to believe, and I don't know. Maybe I just view war differently than everybody else.
I mean, we know it happened in World War I, at least. I don't know. I have never heard of whatever this film is based on, necessarily. Maybe Mitchell can shed more light on that, but...
Right, yeah.
Well, I was going to say that Fritz actually met the sergeant in real life, like, in, like, the 90s, I think.
Huh?
In, like, North Carolina or something. And then that was when he was after that he was interviewed, and that's how they made the movie.
Okay.
So it was basically off of Fritz's and the sergeant's accounts, because everyone else had passed away at that point. But I'm pretty sure that Fritz is still alive.
Jeez.
And he lives in the U.S.
Interesting. Yeah. So not even a historical perspective thing, but just a inability to understand the way certain people act, I guess. But no, I think she sets up the plot really, really well, and there has to be, like, she has to be imposing enough, but then she can't be more intimidating or powerful than the soldiers are themselves, and that's a difficult balance to strike, and I think that's done well. I will say I think the German captain was a little too cartoonish for me. Just sort of in his voice, it just felt more like I was watching like an Avengers cartoon where Red Skull was the villain than I was watching like a real German man, honestly. But however, I will say that the interplay between Hamilton and him about whether she's a traitor or treasonous or not, that was interesting and added a small wrinkle, but at least another element at play that slightly complicated things or made her justify her actions more explicitly. So I think she was good.
Yeah, I think I think there's just I feel like it's just a Hallmark thing. I feel like there's always like a slightly overplayed cartoonish effect that the main characters always have. And I do agree that the lieutenant, I feel like, was definitely a little bit too cartoony. But I think that the SS officer added a great twist. I feel like that really put it into perspective for people that don't necessarily understand the differences between like the SS and the regular officers and stuff. And I thought that was a really cool moment. I mean, there were some Volksdeutsche, like American conscripts in the SS, like a few, like literally like 8 or 9, I think, that were documented ever. There's probably more, and we just don't know about it. But it's it's possible, I guess. But
would they have been?
But yeah,
would they have been on the level that another person would have been like, "Oh, I heard about you guys," like they were an urban legend, or?
I will say that the SS was
okay.
The SS. I don't know about the. I guess you're right. Not like the American accent thing. I've heard about you guys like the Americans, but there are tons of SS that were conscripted, like from the Polish and the European, other European countries and stuff, obviously. So, but yeah, I don't think he would have heard about them or anything. I think that's a little bit too much. But I mean, regardless, I feel like it's a pretty obvious time. I think out of any time, this is like the most where both the Germans and Americans are like seriously disgruntled and like just want to stop fighting because both of them are completely like depleted in resources and like are having a really tough time. Like all the lines are super thin and they're like completely, like we saw this in Band of Brothers was a really great example of that for the Americans at least. But it was the same thing for the Germans. Like they were just completely dug in, just bombing each other and like crossing over. It was just a really bad time. It was a time where, like, honestly, like if people were surrendering to each other and stuff, and like Americans would be a lot easier on the Germans, and the Germans would be a lot easier on the Americans in general. It was just like once morale is that low, it's like I feel like a circumstance like this would happen in very small amounts, but definitely no big Christmas truce or anything. That was never in the cards for anybody. But yeah, I mean, I think that Linda Hamilton did good. I think that sometimes I feel like maybe she's overplaying it a little bit, but I think that her eccentric committing like to her beliefs and stuff is very effective to the point where the no guns policy is just believable enough to push the story forward, and I think that works fine in this thing. But like Christian had said, it's like literally the only leg that this entire thing is standing on, because if they were allowed to keep the guns in there, it would have not happened. I mean, they show it, like, you know, the wounded guy coming out and everything, but and that's another thing, like why Fritz didn't mention that or anything. Maybe he was just scared, but you know, it's whatever. There's enough like minor things that you can pass them off, and I don't think it really is that big. You know, it's not that big of a bother. But yeah, I think that Fritz is a really good actor. I think they use him just enough where he's not too like pushed forward. I think he has some really good like developmental moments when it comes to the Hitler Youth thing and understanding the Americans aren't bad after all kind of thing. And they didn't play that too much. I think it was basically just the beginning and the end that really showed the progression. Like the Americans weren't monsters after all. I guess Hitler was wrong, and that's just like, you know, that works fine. I think, but I don't think that that's like the major message of the film either. And I think just seeing it from Fritz's perspective and letting you take away what you want from it is a much better it's a much better way of looking at the movie for me personally. What else do you guys want to talk about? I don't really know. Would you watch? I was gonna say would. No, go ahead, Christian. Go ahead. All right.
No.
All right. Based on any Hallmark films you've seen, like what makes this one stand out a lot?
Oh, well, I'm gonna jump in immediately and just say the premise. I think so many Hallmark movies nowadays, it's become a meme. Hallmark movies, they shoot 3 of them back to back with the same white couple, one of whom is an actress who used to be kind of big and then got really, really Christian. And you can tell that they were all filmed in the same place because the gazebo shows up in all of them. And they're all about either a woman who's a little too corporate-minded and then goes home for the holidays and meets kind of a hunky guy who gets her into the Christmas spirit, or vice versa with the man, or someone figures out that they're Santa's son or daughter. And that affects their life somehow. Those are the 2 Hallmark premises, or premise. Also, recently, a wild new contender has entered the field, and instead of finding out you're Santa's offspring, you can find out you're a prince or princess. But we're still testing to see if that one holds up. So, compared to those plots, this is like Saving Private Ryan. This is just, which is why like the leg wound kind of shocked me. They're clearly avoiding profanity throughout for a family audience. I think a lot of these grizzled Marines in life or death situations say heck and frickin' a little too often. But there is sort of like a gruffness to it that you definitely don't see in Hallmark movies nowadays. So the fact that it's really taking itself, that it seems to be taking itself seriously as an actual film rather than a televised version of a greeting card, I think makes it, kind of sets it apart from a lot of other Hallmark stuff.
Yeah, I don't have a ton of experience with Hallmark films beyond my understanding of the meme as Zach brilliantly laid out for us, and what limited bits I watched in high school theater class, because apparently they were good references for stage acting.
I don't
guess
remember
in a
that at
sense
all.
you could argue that. Yeah, no, only like once or twice, maybe freshman year, I think, Zach. Or it could be wrong.
I remember we had a high school,
class, so.
we had a graduate of our high school theater program who has showed up in a good handful of Hallmark Christmas movies, so that might also have been a reason to show them in theater class.
Yes, that would do it. I don't know. I think I'll just kind of circle back to what I already said because I can't think of anything else. But I think the performances are solid, and I think I don't feel like Linda Hamilton is desperate, at least not at this stage. Like, it's been, what is this, like early 2000s? It's been like 20-ish years since Terminator, and I feel like at this point she probably has at least some level of acceptance about the fact that, you know, it's in the late stage of her career, and she will always be known for Sarah Connor first. And yeah, I don't know. I like the performances. I like the setting. I think everything is reasonably executed well, and the only other complaint that I haven't yet outlined is I think you could just do away with the framing device entirely with the whole like old man meeting the younger guy, because once you're like 50 minutes into it and the voiceover's gone for like 30 to 40 minutes, and then they're like eating dinner or something, and then the voiceover's just abruptly back, and I was just like, oh, where's this voice coming from? It was very disarming. And I think you could just do without the framing device. I don't think any audience member is going to be confused, or the sentimental will lack its power if you take away that frame. But no, I think it's fine. I think my 2.5 is more of a reflection of my own interest than the quality or lack thereof of this film. And yeah.
You both summed it up pretty well. I really think it stands out, and I think this is worth seeing for the dramatic purposes and for the. Another thing I guess I could mention was the varied supporting actors, because there's not really none of the Hallmark movies tend to have really strong supporting characters in them.
Not usually, no.
Usually it's the cap is usually at like four main characters, and like everyone else is pretty much not important or important for like 2 minutes. And I think for this, I think that they varied them enough where it didn't feel like they're being too overly stereotyped. I mean, I guess you kind of fall into the hole where they're making like such a diverse number of Germans that some of them are going to feel way more stereotyped than the other ones. I think having the younger one that only spoke German was a really important touch, especially paralleling it with Fritz and kind of showing him like, if you were in this is kind of how you'd be feeling about this kind of thing. And like the kind of the grizzly what's it called, the medical trained guy, I think he's a sergeant too, and then obviously like the really committed lieutenant and everything kind of representing them. And I think having them, and then the SS officer, I just think it was varied enough where it felt like it was trying to be a part of something bigger. It was trying constantly referencing the fact that there was a war going on and that there was a constant ideological battle at play. And then I feel like it's impactful mostly in a positive way when it's kind of being brought back where she's like, wait, we're in the no guns cabin, putting up stuff and eating our MREs and play fighting with each other and everything. And I feel like that is very. I feel like that really says a lot. I feel like that puts things into perspective for a lot of people, and it's a good message. And I feel like it's not overly caked in the Hallmark positivity, especially with all of the very stressful and terrible moments that Zach was mentioning. And I feel like, and even though like at the end, if in case you forget at any point, it's a Hallmark movie. It's always going to end positively. With a very slight touch of realism, and I feel like that is it's heartwarming, and it feels a lot more worth it in this case than compared to other Hallmark films that are fairly straightforward most of the time. That's all I had. If you all have anything else, it's a great movie.
I think I summed up my thoughts pretty extensively.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't have anything explicitly for Silent Night, but I will just say I'm glad we're still doing this whole podcast, and I feel like every time we revisit a film that's beloved by one of us and maybe more of a shrug for the rest of us, we get a little bit like better at understanding each of our whys. And I don't know. I'm really thankful for this process, and I think it's making me a more empathetic person and a more thoughtful.
One of these days,
the Cookie Pocket guests. Yeah, they finally came together.
One of these days,
on this Christmas day,
we're gonna have this courteous of a discussion about an Italian horror film. It's gonna happen. No. We've gone from active anger to apathy. We're gonna get to courtesy eventually. We'll see. Yes.
We'll see.
Yes. Silent Night. It may not be your cup of tea, but it may be Christmas Eve, peeing and singing O Tannenbaum in different languages.
Oh, yes.
In the snow. Right. Using guns as axes, or axes as guns.
Yes, yeah.
Convincing enough for me. Okay, on to the bits.
The week in review, yeah. So a couple days ago, we all met up with a friend of ours for one of our semi-regular movie nights, and this was DreamWorks night. So we watched 3 DreamWorks animated features: Madagascar, The Road to El Dorado, and Kung Fu Panda. Would anyone like to start with their thoughts on these 3 moving pictures?
No, why are you saying?
Because technically I'm not the host, so I don't want to get too big and animated and just take control of everything.
DreamWorks should be canceled for all the butts and stereotypes.
Oh, jeez. Well,
I'm sick
if
of
we're
it.
talking exclusively about Madagascar, I would agree with that. No, I guess I'm starting. Madagascar,
Yep.
I think, is a bad film. I don't think it's a terrible film, but I do not think it's a good film. The character designs are really, really ugly, and the film is like determined to shove them in your face like jump scares pretty consistently. The amount of times that Melman's face is like the entire frame for only like a second, almost like it's like that moment in The Exorcist when Pazuzu's face pops up for like a frame and then it goes away. But it's Melman the giraffe. It feels like it's meant to be off-putting. Additionally, I pointed this out in my Letterboxd review. It falls prey to this issue that has kind of existed in some animation from the very beginning of the medium, where some animators or some animation companies or some animation directors seem to have this mentality, especially early on, that for things to be funny in animation, they've always got to be moving and they've always got to be emoting in some way. So this is where you get early animated stuff I would even argue very early stuff by Disney from like the 20s and from other animators where everything has a face and is like constantly bouncing around, even like fences and blades of grass and the sun. And on maybe in a more specific way, this Madagascar has that issue with its characters where Marty is the zebra. Alex is constantly just moving all over the place, and Ben Stiller seems really out of his element as this like youthful, energetic character. I mentioned this on the night of, but I think Ben Stiller has really hit his stride in middle age because he plays downtrodden, corporate-minded men so well. In things like the Meyerowitz stories and is it called Brad's Status? He plays this.
Yes.
He plays disappointed with all of his life choices so well, and that means that when I see him in these like early 2000s comedies, even the animated stuff, when I just hear him, I feel like he's being wasted so much. Yeah, wasn't a fan of Madagascar. I preferred Road to El Dorado. I thought Road to El Dorado was a lot of fun, especially those two lead characters. And I think the songs have really great hooks, but other than that, they're pretty unmemorable. Over the past few days, I have been humming "It's Tough to Be a God" so often. Because that's the only bit of the song I think that 80% of people remember, but it's a great hook. And I did say in my Letterboxd review, I wish they'd gotten sequels to this that had like more pointed plots. Because Road to El Dorado, they kind of show up and hang around for about 80 minutes, and then the rest of the plot shows up in the form of the conquistadors, and it kind of ends in a hurry. I wish there was a little more tension in between those 2 points. It sort of feels like it's meant to be there in the form of the high priest, but he never really feels like he's actively trying to trip them up in any way. He's just sort of has a big smile and says things kind of lasciviously, which makes you feel like he is, even though he isn't really. And then finally, Kung Fu Panda, I thought was definitely the best film of the night. It has an excellent color palette. All the characters are really well animated and designed, and the voice actors fit their roles, even though I do think that the big stars that play the Furious Five are very underused. And also, it seems a weird decision to cast some of them as animated characters. The whole thing with Jackie Chan, his whole appeal is how he moves and does stunts on screen. So it seems a little without point to cast him as an animated character where he's not really doing any of the movements and only says mundane sentences like, haha, yeah, every now and then. But it is a good movie. 3 out of 5 Kung Fu Panda, 2 out of 5 Road to El Dorado, and 2 out of 5 Madagascar. And those are my thoughts on DreamWorks Night.
I hope I don't drop the bridge.
Seth Rogen is like the only one who kind of gets jokes. And David Cross just sounds like a man. He sounds like they got a PA and we're like, can you read a couple of lines? Like, there's none of his personality in Crane at all.
Yeah. Well, Zach, hearing you recap Madagascar, it sounds like a grand time. But I think viewing that after sitting through the stiff, alienating frame rates, yeah, I unfortunately mostly agree with you. I think that Melvin is really funny, and David Schwimmer pleasantly surprised me. I think he's probably like the best suited to the material of the principal cast. I just think he embraces the comedy the best of that bunch. And I don't have a problem with the character designs as much as I have a problem with them being shoved in our face and just moving so herky-jerkily. And I mean, I'm trying to give it some leeway for the time period, but we discovered Madagascar came out in 2005. Finding Nemo came out 2 years earlier in 2003, and it is legions, inexpressibly more fluid and inviting visually. So still some good laughs in Madagascar, but it does. Also just kind of ends. Like, there's no resolution. It just stops and it's over, and that's annoying. The Road to El Dorado is fun. I gave it a 3.5, and the songs to me are just completely unmemorable. Until Zach just now sang the hook to "It's Tough to Be a God." Now that's sort of in my head, but like after we had watched all of these, I was trying to recall a single measure of any of them, and I just couldn't. But the characters are fun, and 3.5. Kung Fu Panda, though.
It's a triumph.
Kung Fu Panda.
Jack Black.
Kung Fu Panda is cinema. This is Kino. This is a 4.5 out of 5, and I really, really mean it, because boy, oh boy, I'll admit it's a pretty standard hero's journey thing, but just it hits those beats so well, and I think Oogway is a phenomenal piece of character design, because he's this imposing turtle, but he also feels kind of frail and old, and in his face, the way he moves his lips feels a lot like the way a human geriatric might speak, which is, it works really well. It sounds silly to spell that out, like dissecting a frog, but it really works. And I legitimately think Dustin Hoffman's performance as Shifu is up there with like The Graduate and Marathon Man. Like, I think he's fantastic as Shifu. I think his inflections are great, and it really feels like he's the character more than he is doing a Dustin Hoffman role, and it's truly spectacular in my eyes. It's just, I don't know, there's so much feeling. It's a movie for everyone, and it's really well executed. It looks great, and it's hilarious. I laughed out loud. This is one I had on DVD and watched all the time when I was younger, and I haven't watched it for probably a decade or so. So I was really, really happy to watch it again.
I love Madagascar when it came out. That was my entire movie. My entire movie. Okay? All of it. All of it was mine. Honestly, Madagascar gets carried by the fact that it's SNL with an entirely different cast in a different setting.
Every show and movie is SNL with an entirely different cast and different setting.
I don't know what you mean, Zach. I don't know what you mean. Melman is high art, okay?
I do think Melman is one of the funniest.
We're running out of time.
Okay, that is, and then Melman's funeral is pretty amusing too.
Fire! Oh gosh. I will say that, and the Penguins obviously are fantastic, and they totally did deserve a show, and I love the show too. But I feel like, ironically, Madagascar is best left to zoo merchandise than a character study. And I think that it is not at all complicated. It's a meme of a movie for a reason, because it has a very, 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 very thin plot, and you basically can see where it's going if you're older than 12. But I do think that works for the sake of it being a kids movie, especially at this time. And the bar wasn't super high, really. Even though with films like Finding Nemo and especially with like looking back and seeing which films actually had really good, like, memorable themes, this one is not that great for that. And I give it 3 stars. I'm gonna give it 3 stars. I haven't posted any of my reviews yet, so you're hearing it live. We're doing it live. So I think that Madagascar is definitely. I think it'll be funny for any child will think that this is funny in some respect, and I feel like there's enough diversity in the voice acting, and the scenarios are crazy and zany enough where there's just enough for kids to be interested, but it's not at all like top tier, even for DreamWorks. And going on to Road to El Dorado, another film I also loved a lot. Like, these first two films, literally, me and my sister would quote all the time, and every time she'd come over, I just want to watch them all the time, and I really love them. And even though I think Road to El Dorado had a really good setting, and I think that the musical numbers, I agree, you can't only really remember the hooks, but I think self-contained in the film, I think without having like a major lasting impact, I think they're well paced and introduced at the right times, and I think they mostly work with the dialogue and the main plot line. But other than that, I mean, I was just watching Kenneth Branagh in Conspiracy, and if you don't know what that movie is, you should look that up. I'm not even going to say what it is. Okay. But Kenneth Branagh in Conspiracy was great, and also in Dunkirk. And I think that those are the and Tenet. And I think that, I think he's a really good voice actor, and I always forget the other voice actor's name.
Kevin Kline.
Help me, Zach. Thank you, Kevin Kline. They play off of each other really well, and I do agree sometimes they sound similar, but I kind of know what Kenneth Branagh sounds like, so I'm not really concerned about that. And overall, I think it's a good, like, fun adventure kids movie. Not politically correct anymore. I'm sorry.
Is it?
But I don't think it is, Zach. I don't think it is. You can make that argument for most animated films from this time anyway. But
the other thing about it, and it's not just how it's drawn, but it is kind of strangely, I think, sexually charged. It is sexually charged,
yes. And a bit too risque, and maybe a tiny bit violent. It has blood in it, so, I mean, for like a minute. But it's not... we've seen way crazier from way earlier, but I think overall it really does stand out to me. I feel like people know what you're talking about if they've seen this before, and I feel like it's fairly memorable, in my opinion. But it's not that super high standard. I would give it a 3.5. I think I love it. I'm sorry. and the casual, like, that DreamWorks humor is resonant in all 3 of these films, but I will say, going on to Kung Fu Panda, that it uses it the most effectively. And yeah, Kung Fu Panda does take, like, a lot of traditional, like, plot lines when it comes to a hero's journey, but it also really, stylistically, it's like second to none. Like, it really does stand out fantastically, and honestly, like, Jack Black is, like, not by far, nothing could replace his performance in this. And it's just serious at just the right moments, and heartwarming at the right moments, and you know that it's going to end great, and there's nothing that's, like, super, like, this could end any way type thing. But the stakes do feel a lot more real than you would expect, and that's the reason why it feels great. And it's just the Chinese background and just making everything so much fun but also detrimental at the same time is a very hard thing to pull off. And we obviously mentioned Finding Nemo. That's, like, in my opinion, like, the pinnacle of that, basically, is being able to, like, go back and forth between that humor and making terrible situations in an animated movie that's meant for kids be so impactful. And I feel like Kung Fu Panda really masters that. So I want to say I want to give it a 4 just because I do think it really is great. I'm not going to go as far to say it's like high art, but I will say that it really, really stands out, especially with DreamWorks films. Like, I don't know anybody that that doesn't love some aspect of this movie. And the Furious Five are great, and they're nothing like super like to write home about or anything. They're more like the Dirty Dozen kind of sense, where they have a few character traits and that's it, and that's good enough. But the journey's about Poe and about the Dragon Warrior, and very simple to understand. It works great. So 4 to 5.
All right. Is it time for me to sing a song? Or Mitchell is making a gesture with his hand. So okay, it's not time for me to sing a song. It's time for the Marvelous Cinema Tour. And this time we've hit... We've hit the European stop on the Marvelous Cinema Tour. So break out your baguettes and your berets, because we're talking about Spider-Man: Far From Home. This is...
I almost forgot that was in France.
Yeah, me too.
It is briefly, yeah. This is the last MCU film I saw in the cinema.
Wow.
Because we all saw this, I think, the summer after we graduated from high school. We went to see it with a friend of ours, same friend who was at DreamWorks Night. And I remember at the time quite enjoying it. Because, I was a teenager. I was sort of enamored with the idea that they had kind of rom-com concepts working their way into these Spider-Man movies, and that was kind of fun. And Tom Holland and Zendaya are attractive people, so, that's fun. But looking back on it for this series, maybe I'm just burdened by the weight of however many MCU movies I've watched now, but this one really grated on me this time round. To be fair, though, I think it's probably because this is the MCU movie that I've seen the most. Not necessarily by my choice,
Oh my
but I
God.
just happen to have seen it the most.
It's so unfortunate.
I've seen this one like 5 times, I think.
Oh,
I think
And
I've
that's
seen
too
it
many.
twice.
that is too many.
That's too many times. It's a totally fine movie. It's like a dead 3 out of 5. It's totally okay. I do think it gets a little overhated. People call it like one of the worst MCU films, which I think is kind of unfair. It's just really unexceptional. I think Jake Gyllenhaal is fun in it. I'm glad to see Ralphie from A Christmas Story make his return from being a cameo in the very first Iron Man, because that actor is friends with Jon Favreau, and so played both of those roles. But it's very... While watching it, I was just left with this feeling. I wanted to rewatch it because I hadn't reviewed it yet on Letterboxd. I wanted to rewatch it for this tour, but I was just left with this constant feeling of, I don't need to rewatch this movie. I wanted to do my due diligence, but at no point was I surprised. At no point did I encounter something that I had not noticed on my first couple runs through the movie. It's everything is on the surface level. There is nothing below the surface level. And I think to a certain extent, being somebody who's on film Twitter and Letterboxd, there is this real discourse that pops up every now and then in relation to the MCU, where a lot of MCU fans who are hardcore fans of the MCU lifers, if you will, seem to dislike this idea of a film tricking them or taking them by surprise in some way. A lot of hardcore MCU fans and fans of like a franchise or fans of a logo seem to not like this idea of being advertised one thing or being told one thing and then getting another. And I think that means that a lot of these Marvel movies at this point are very much what you see is what you get. The one bunch of pixels will punch the other bunch of pixels. Someone will make a joke about a fast food chain or taxis in New York or something quippy like that. Someone may kiss someone else very briefly. No open mouth kissing though, only closed mouth. Another character may briefly acknowledge that they are gay, but only for one scene, so we can cut it out in China. And that's kind of what you're gonna get. Watching this film, I think the fast food cinema term is kind of derogatory, and I don't really like to fall back on it. But watching this movie again, I felt so much like I was looking at the McDonald's menu board and just like, well, what do I have to pick today? And you have those 20 options. You have a choice. You might be getting something a little different, but you're not ever going to be getting something that you didn't expect. And that's just so daunting to me, and I can't wait to be done. 3 out of 5. It was totally fine. I think the next one I have up when we return for season 4 will be Black Widow, I think.
Ooh.
That seems weird to
Me and
say.
Christian love that movie.
We handled that on a week in review somewhere.
We did.
It was really fun.
And it seems weird to say that because I remember Black Widow coming out so far after Far From Home, but I think that's just the COVID gap. I think it's Black Widow. I might be wrong about that though. But stay tuned next time to see more of my ongoing descent into madness.
The multiverse of madness.
Into the multiverse of
Quantum
my ongoing
mania.
descent into the weird world.
Yeah. I'll just say real quick, Zach, I think your complaints are only compounded by the fact that, spoiler alert, we're expected to not know that Jake Gyllenhaal is playing the villain. But because I'll just say, I think anybody with even the vaguest level of understanding of who Mysterio is and who Spider-Man is totally saw that coming. And the fact that like the whole first hour of the movie hangs on that reveal is just really, really annoying to me.
Yeah, I will agree with that. I think if they were going to play Mysterio as a hero, they had to either... Because fans were always going to know that Mysterio was going to be the villain. People who even have a cursory knowledge of what Spider-Man is were always going to know that Mysterio was the villain. Mm-hmm. I have read maybe 2 issues of Spectacular Spider-Man, none of even like the core run of the comics, and I watched the 90s Spider-Man show intermittently when I was like 8 years old, and I still knew who Mysterio was. Mm-hmm. So fans were always going to know. But if you wanted to trick anybody, I feel like you had to either really redesign the character or claim that Jake Gyllenhaal was playing somebody else and reveal that it was Mysterio at some point in the film. But they're never going to do that because the fans don't want one pulled over on them. Yep. But yeah, watching this, I was like, why? Okay, if he's a hero, why is his face in a bubble? You know? Like, big globe head with smoke in it is a villain thing. Like, heroes don't do that. Heroes don't conceal their likeness in a big glass bubble.
Oh, maybe we got a little bit more creative, Zach. Maybe we put some effort into this instead of just changing everything. You know?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Although, then again, I don't know. It's weird to say that they're so bound to the fans in this film when potentially the very next film is maybe their most we angered the fans for substantially changing something film on record with what is that character's name? Skullduggery.
Close enough. Close enough.
Taskmaster. There we go.
Skullduggery.
So much better.
It actually is better. That's the problem.
I can't make any claims for that though yet because I haven't seen the film. All right, and on that bombshell, I think it's time to move on to the rundown.
Oh my god. It's just impossible to follow Zach misremembering what a certain Marvel character or title is.
Wait, skullduggery is a word?
Yeah. It means, like, malevolent plotting.
You ever seen Skullduggery 1970, directed by Gordon Douglas?
I haven't, but I did read Skullduggery Pleasant when I was a kid. I don't know if you had those books in your school library. He's a detective, but he's a skeleton.
That's a little bit silly. I read Encyclopedia Brown.
And he's a ghost, and he can throw fireballs. It was fun.
Oh, this is such a fun story for our children.
Speaking of fun stories, Silent Night rundown. We're gonna sprint all the way back to Linda Hamilton and Friends. Zach's gonna start this one off. Zach, are you ready?
I am ready, yeah.
Okay, 3, 2, 1, go.
Linda Hamilton's dodgy German accent.
3 out of 5.
No guns in the house.
2 out of 5.
Potato soup.
4 out of 5.
Huckleberry Finn.
4 out of 5.
Mein Kampf.
1 out of 5.
Believing everything you hear on the radio.
1 out of 5.
The Iron Cross.
2 out of 5.
Dying in Stalingrad.
1 out of 5.
Dog tag tree topper.
4 out of 5.
Disagreeing with Nazis on a lot of things.
4 out of 5.
A wooden cabin with modern walls made of stone.
2 out of 5.
Pineapple pudding.
4 out of 5.
Christmas cookies.
5 out of 5.
Voiceover that disappears for half an hour.
2 out of 5.
No shiny surfaces in the house.
3 out of 5.
O Tannenbaum versus O Christmas Tree.
4 out of 5.
Stille Nacht versus Silent Night.
4 out of 5.
Keeping your head up and your eyes on the stars.
4 out of 5.
Christmas.
1 second.
2 out of 5.
Time. Wait, what?
Yep.
Wait, what?
We just finished our third and final holiday special, and we're gonna leave
On Martin Luther King
Christmas?
Jr. Day.
I didn't like Zach's accent. Tis the nature of the rundown in the Christmas spirit. To be honest,
true.
how you feel.
Wow.
Well,
Are we even previewing anything now?
Yeah,
Or-
I can't believe
I don't
you
think
put Mein
we
Kampf.
can. I think
so
we can.
ridiculous.
That was my idea. I don't really think we have anything to preview. I think all we can really say is we intend to be back this summer for season 4.
Mm-hmm.
I know on at least my part, I'm hoping to bring along a lot of new guests. So hopefully we'll hear a lot of new voices this summer.
Me as well.
Speaking of new voices, a lot of them are working on my senior capstone film, The Search for Alexander.
Oh,
If you've
wow.
made it this far, you're probably one of our most loyal listeners. So please consider donating to my crowdfunding campaign for my senior capstone film, The Search for Alexander. There's a link in the description below, and you can also find it at www.seedandspark.com/fund The Search for Alexander. Thank you for your consideration.
Wow. And then Christmas was over. So sad.
The 12th day of Christmas wasn't that long ago, actually.
Whatever.
Because 12th day of Christmas, I think, is like
All Saints Day? When is All Saints Day? When was that?
I don't know. It's not on my calendar.
Christian, hot seat. When is All
I don't
Saints
know.
Day?
Cue the jingle.
Wow. Put the Christmas jingle. This was Silent Night. The night is silent. Good day. Good night.